Hello everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about creativity and how to harness our creative thinking or divergent thinking. And the reason why I'm making this video is because I recently went to the museum and I saw some of the most magnificent pieces of artwork that I'll ever see in my life. And one of them really stood out to me. And I was so struck by the painting, and it had to do directly with the Count of Monte Cristo, but I was so struck by it that I couldn't help but be elated by it. And the feeling, the physiological reaction that I had when I saw the painting, I can't put into words. It's ineffable. The painting itself is ineffable, but I really wanted to investigate that feeling, and I wanted to duplicate that feeling for myself. And then I came to the conclusion that creativity has a very strong correlation with these divine, celestial pieces of work. And again, I want to be able to encapsulate that process for myself in my own field, in my own given interest. And what's cool about creativity and divergent thinking is that we can use it in all given forms of life, in all domains, in all avenues of interest that we partake in. And yeah, so that's the main reason, the main motivation behind making this video. So without further ado, let's begin with what is creativity? So creativity itself is equivocal. It's very difficult to pinpoint, and I think it takes away from creativity itself if we put it into a definitional box. So in that case, we're going to be using the term divergent thinking, which is just basically creative thinking. It's the process of being creative. Now, divergent thinking is being able to generate as many outcomes, solutions, ideas that are unique, imaginative, original, and novel. And what's cool is divergent thinking can be used within anything, like I said earlier. So now, how do we access divergent thinking? How do we educe our threshold of being creative? Well, number one, we have to understand that creativity is actually fixed. It's just like IQ in that sense. They're not similar, but in that sense, they are similar. Our IQ is fixed. Our IQ is primarily biological, but so is creativity actually. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't be creative and that none of us or all of us are either creative or not creative, right? It just means that there's different levels to this. There's different magnitudes of creativity, but all of us can harness creative thinking, which is the key in what we're going to explore today. There also isn't a robust method or test to calculate creativity, because having a test or measurement for creativity would literally contradict creativity itself. If everybody can exemplify creativity in the process of it, well then it's not creative anymore. So it's counterintuitive in that sense. So how do we actually become creative? What constitutes as creativity? And again, how do we educe these divergent ways of thinking? So in 1947, a psychologist named Dr. Guilford actually tried to quantify and measure creativity. And he came up with 3 distinct conditions of being creative and what it sort of encompassed creativity. Number 1 was fluency. Fluency is the ease, the effortlessness in how you generate ideas. It's the quantity of ideas that you generate with smoothness, and there's a lack of strain and strenuous activity that goes within fluency. You have a mastery of whatever you're doing, and it comes across eloquently and effortlessly. And so that was measured by the number of ideas generated, the quantity of them, right? So that's fluency. So then there was flexibility. So flexibility was quantified based on the number of categories that you generated, the overarching themes that you generated. So remember, fluency was the specific ideas, where flexibility was the categories, the overarching themes of those ideas. So then the last one, originality, that was measured based on the statistical infrequence of your ideas, of your flexibility, of your fluency. It's how different the ideas were from the rest of the sample size, the originality, right? The uniqueness of the ideas themselves. So that's Dr. Guilford's main processing on how creativity should be assessed. And what's cool is from this study, we actually realized that fluency has a 21% correlation with intelligence, and originality has a 16% correlation with intelligence, which is really interesting, right? And I also think that fluency is very closely intertwined with processing speed. But again, those were his conditions for creativity. Okay, so now I'm going to delineate how I harness and educe divergent thinking. So number one is I need a process. And this is a commonality between all the great thinkers, philosophers, inventors, psychologists. They all had a process in how they went about their greatest works, on how they were able to untangle the most intricate and difficult, convoluted nets of thought for themselves. And when they were the most creative, they had a process. Da Vinci talks about this, and all the great thinkers, they also talk about this. And for me, it's having a clean work table. It's looking my best. It's dressing sharp and eloquently. And what that does for me is it provides this insatiable confidence which is intrinsic, that I can accomplish what I need to accomplish, that I can think of what I need to think of. And all of a sudden, I start making associations of things that I never would have thought, which is interesting. And so the next thing within the process is I like to go on walks or take a shower. And I'm sure you guys can relate to this, but when you do take a shower, when you go on a nice long walk, all of a sudden the most profound and stupendous ideas start hitting you. You start making connections. You start linking creative endeavors with things that you never have thought of, right? And there is a reason for this, two main reasons. Number one, when you're taking a walk or when you're taking a shower and when you think within those things, you're focused mainly on yourself. Your thoughts are all your own, and there's seldom any distractions. And what's cool is that walking and taking a shower, they act as a suppressor for your brain. It suppresses and de-amplifies the negative, irrelevant, frivolous thoughts that hinder our creative juices, that disparage our tremendous and incredible ways of thinking. You're focused mainly on the thought itself. You can be critical and creative, which is awesome. So you need a process. And for that to happen, you need to experiment. You need to find what works for you. And this is interesting because you can sort of experiment with this vividly. And to do that, you just need to try new things. So I'd recommend going on walks. I'd recommend taking a shower. And I'd recommend having a deep insight on whatever that thing you're working on, so you can actually access the interwoven links between them. You can have the understanding and comprehension of what you're trying to be creative on, right? So that's what I would say to that. So the next thing for me is I need a certain amount of fervor that goes within what I'm working on, what I'm trying to be creative within. And what I've realized is when I'm more passionate, when my emotions are engaged with the thing that I want to accomplish, with the thing that I want to be creative within, is I'm more likely to actually draw those connections and to be creative. And I think there's a reason for that. So emotional engagement itself is actually a subset of emotional intelligence, of EQ, and it's the closest one to creativity. Emotional engagement actually implies creativity. It's actually one of the ways to assess emotional engagement. Is how creative you can become within that cognitive task. So when my emotions are there, when my passion is there, when I really want to accomplish something and I need to accomplish it, all of a sudden I'm more likely to become creative. And I think this is a common thing for most people. When you're more passionate about something, you're more likely to accomplish and think of unique and independent ways of generating those alternative ideas. So it's important to be emotionally engaged within that field, within that work that you're trying to delve into. So the third one is focus and having this access to the flow state, which they're sort of connected. So if you remember in a previous video in my Q&A, I talked about the flow state, and I actually talked about how we can access the flow state. And to access the flow state, you have to have focus, you have to have this amount of fervor, but you have to be doing a task that is challenging enough, but not impossible, if that makes sense. There has to be a balance, an equilibrium between the two, and then you can actually enter the flow state. And for myself, as I noticed when I'm most creative, is I'm in the flow state. There's no distractions. It's me and my work. It's me and my ideas, my thoughts for myself. And that's awesome because it can definitely signify creativity. Because when you're so focused and there's nothing that holds you back, you're more likely to become creative. So lastly is I actually quite heavily value fluency within my creative prowess. And just like Dr. Guilford, I tremendously value fluency. And I actually value this before I even read his article. One of my conditions was fluency. And it's cool because fluency is so important to like what I do. It's so vital to my everyday work, to my everyday processes of what I choose to engage with, whether that's psychology, philosophy, classics, literature, and even verbiage, is I need this fluency that goes within it. And remember, fluency is how smooth, eloquent, effortless you can generate ideas. There's no strain, there's no strifling, there's no strenuous vigor that comes with fluency. It's smooth, it's effortless. There's a mastery, there's an implied control over the things, over the thoughts of your brain, which I think is so crucial to creativity, because when I'm creative, there's no difficulty. It's not arduous. It's effortless, it's smooth. And that's fluency. And again, you can actually take a fluency test, by the way, and all you have to do is, let's say, okay, you give yourself 2 minutes, think of as many 4-letter words that start with the letter F. And the quantity of what you get is how fluent you are. And again, that's just one way to test your fluency. But the cool thing is fluency can actually be increased. And again, it is synonymous to processing speed, but not entirely. Fluency implies more depth and implies more insight to the thing that you're constructing, what you're generating, what you're conceiving. Where processing speed is just raw cognition. But fluency again has this implied idea within it. So fluency is vital for me for creativity. There's also one more commonality that I noticed within the most creative people, and it's this ability to forego or relinquish cognitive biases. This ability to not generalize and not let your preconceived notions get in the way of whatever you want to be creative within. So when you're creative, remember, it's an alternative, it's a unique solution. And that means it can't be conventional. And conventional thinking obviously explicitly showcases biases. It showcases set and absolute ways of thinking. And creativity cannot have that. There's no room for that if you want to have tremendous divergent thinking. So the ability to let go of your biases, to think objectively, but also to investigate all possibilities and to have a synergy with all these possibilities, now that can truly lead to creativity. Okay, so now that you know all my conditions to assimilate divergent thinking, I want to give you a metaphor or a non-temporal example on how I view creativity. So think of this. Think of an infinite library with all these different concepts, all these different pieces of wisdom and knowledge, and they all have every possible interpretation and outcome of that given field that you're within, that given domain of interest in which you're choosing to allocate yourself within to be creative, right? So there's an infinite library. So one, you need the process. You need the way to enter the library, and that's the process. Entering the library itself is the process. So number two, the fervor. The fervor is the willingness to actually engage with the different books, the different pieces of wisdom and knowledge that you're going to have to associate yourself with in order to be creative. The fervor is the reinforcement. It's the stabilizer, and it's the substantiator to being creative, because it propels you to be creative, right? It's that motivator. So number three is the focus and the flow state. So we're in the library. We have the motivation to search and associate and connect all these books. Now we need the focus. We need the adroitness, the sagacity on how to go about it. And that's the flow state. There's no distractions. It's a clean library. It's only you. You're the only employee. You're the headmaster. You're the librarian. And that's the flow state. you're the owner of that, and that is the focus itself. There's no other things there. It's just you and your books. And then there's a fluency. Fluency is what sort of helps you synergize all the books together. So it helps you connect the different ideas that you need to connect in order to be unique, imaginative, original, even fantastical. And this fluency allows you to do it with effortlessness and grace. And this is like sort of your method on how you go about looking at each book. All of a sudden, you look at one book and you realize, nah, this isn't going to help me at all. And you dispose of it, and you look at another one and another one. But the way that you do it is effortless. There's elegance to it. And with that, you can eventually construct this woven interplay of beautiful and original ideas that help you, that are conducive to success, and the ramifications of these ideas will eventually become magnificent. So that's just a way on how I like to look at creativity. So I want to give a literary example of my creative thought process and how I assimilate divergent thinking, and I wanted to exemplify it through the great hero of the Trojan War, the silver-tongued Odysseus, because I believe that he signified this perfectly. So Odysseus came up with quite the cunning and mendacious creative plot against the Cyclops. Basically, Cyclops captured him and all of his men, and he devoured and ate like 6 of them. And so Odysseus needed to think of something fast, and he had to be creative enough to, impede the great Cyclops. So Polyphemus was the Cyclops' name. And so Odysseus came up with a strategy. They say it's a plan, but it was more of a strategy. And what he does is he gets the Cyclops drunk, so he'll eventually fall asleep. But before he gets him drunk, he tells the Cyclops that his name is No One. And he says this in Greek, but he says his name is No One. And the Cyclops just accepted that. And they get him drunk. Odysseus offers him wine as sort of a tribute to him, as like an honor. And he falls asleep, and him and his men, they construct this wooden weapon, and they jettison fire within the tip of it, and they pierce it through the Cyclops' eye. Cyclops screams, and it gets the attention of the other Cyclops within the island. And the Cyclops ask him, "Who did this to you? What happened?" And Polyphemus, the main, whatever his name is, the main Cyclops says, "No one did this to me." Because that's what Odysseus told him his name was. He told him his name was No One, and it worked. It was quite the cunning plot that he constructed. But it's interesting because I realized that like my conditions for creativity also can apply to that, because it was quite the creative plot, if you ask me, especially for the time. And Odysseus was known for his creativity and his adroit uses of deception. So number one, he had to have the fervor. He had to have the willingness and the passion, and in this case the emotion was desperation, vindication, and revenge for his men. So that had to be there. And then he had to have a process to construct the plan, and he came up with the process on his own with fluency and with grace. But the process was constructed due to the situation at hand, which was interesting, and that was sort of the gateway to coming up with a creative plan. He needed to be creative, and this process was able to get him within that state. That's who Odysseus is. And then the third one was focus, and being within the flow state. And of course, he had to have tremendous focus for this plot to even happen, for this plot to manifest and execute it with such success. And lastly, the fluency. Of course, at the end of this plot, Odysseus starts becoming boisterous and braggadocious towards the Cyclops, saying, "You've been outwitted by the great Odysseus himself," which was interesting. But the way that he executed and he constructed the plan was, one, very quick, so the formulation speed was there, which is also fluency, but also it was graceful and it was effortless on how he executed it. And so it's interesting that he had all of the conditions that I laid out. But again, I think you can sort of draw this example to a lot of examples of creativity, because again, creativity is quite equivocal, but my process works for me, and I can associate it and connect it with other examples of creativity. So in that case, I'm okay with that. Okay, so that's going to do it for this video, but I really want to emphasize how important creativity is, because again, it really is one of the gateways to beauty, and it helps us, it takes us away from the banality of this world, the mundane, everyday lifestyle that we engage with. And I really hope that I can duplicate that jubilance that I felt when I saw that painting for myself and encapsulate a high level of creativity for myself. And I hope you guys can do the same. And I hope this video was educational and insightful for that pursuit. Okay, take care.